Hey guys, it's Alex from 7th Hour Films, back again with Dad, and back again with Doctor Who Classic. Last time on Doctor Who, Dad, what happened last time?
Well, we were watching the first appearance of the Daleks, which I remember. But again, reminding everyone, it's been 50 years since I've seen some of these episodes. And again, I think today's episodes are things that happened after I left England. We were there from June of 1963 to June of 1966. And I think the one that we're looking at today...
Yeah, this is 1967 now.
So, I would not see Doctor Who again until I was in college. And by that time, Tom Baker, the fourth Doctor, was the one who was taking care of business. And that used to play like Saturday night at 10:30 on PBS. So it was rare that I got to watch it. So I only saw a few episodes of Tom Baker.
So you haven't even seen the next one that we're going to watch next week. So,
and which one is that?
Next week is Terror of the Autons, which is the third Doctor.
No, I wouldn't have seen... I don't think I saw any of the second or third Doctor at all.
Interesting. Well, speaking of that, we are on the second Doctor today, which means even if we did fully recap the last episode that we watched, really has no bearing on what we're watching today. At least I assume it doesn't, but who knows? Maybe it does. We're going to have a new Doctor. I think we have new companions, and yeah, this is going to be Tomb of the Cybermen. This is where I say no spoilers in the comments whatsoever. Let's stick to this episode and previous episodes of Classic Doctor Who, Normal Doctor Who, and Torchwood that I have reacted to. And, yeah.
Okay, now, it is my understanding, this is one of those things that I read much, much later, that it was the Cybermen who caused the first Doctor to regenerate. Is that correct? That's my understanding, is that when Hartnell wanted out of the show, there was some encounter with the Cybermen that caused him to regenerate, and that's what they did when they had the second Doctor.
Maybe not. I haven't heard much about that, like the circumstances around it. All I know is that they didn't show the actual regeneration from Hartnell to Patrick Troughton. They just... The next episode, which I think was the next season, Patrick Troughton just walks in. It's the same companions. He just walks in, and they don't even mention it at all that he used to be a different guy. So even his companions are like, is this still the same guy? We're not sure. He kind of acts like him, but he's a lot different. So
okay.
So yeah, well, maybe if that is the case, we'll get to that someday. I don't know when.
Okay.
It's gonna be a while. It's going to be a while before we ever meet up with the first Doctor and his crew again. So I think the next time is somewhere around when I get to Series 7. And I'm on Series 4 right now. So
at some point, I would like to watch the Crusade episodes. And again, I think some of those may have been lost. But the reason that I mentioned this, I think the first time we did this, I met one of the actors from the Crusade series in either 1980 or 81, a guy named John Bay, who was from London. Funny guy. He had written and performed a one-man show about the life of Groucho Marx. And I found out again years later that he had been on Doctor Who, and I had probably seen that. So
interesting. Well, we'll see how we can work that into the schedule. I'm sure there's some point that we can do that, but I don't know. Schedule gets more convoluted every time I look at it. So with that all being said, let's get right into Tomb of the Cybermen. Here we go. Ooh, we get a different intro this time.
Yeah. And you can tell the slight variations of the theme itself.
Yeah. Different font for the logo. This is a lot trippier. It's nice.
Oh yeah, I meant to tell you how they used to do that back in the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
Your father and Maxtable were working on the same problem, but I have...
Wonder if he was on one of the British serial.
Rather special.
My mom used to watch Coronation Street, which is a kind of a 2 nights a week soap opera that they used to do.
Try to give us a smooth takeoff, Doctor. We don't want to frighten her.
A smooth takeoff?
Unheard of.
A smooth takeoff? What a nerve!
I mean, it would help if we knew, like, anything like where she came from.
Now, my understanding, one of the writers there, Kit Pedler, was like one of the science advisors on the show, and he's the one who came up with this idea in the 60s. I remember in 68 especially, they did their first heart transplant where they implanted a mechanical heart into somebody, kept him alive for quite some time. So they were just dealing with this idea of mechanics to replace human systems, which is what kind of inspired all of this.
Sorry, we had to make it a pretty big one.
All right, let's get on with it.
So you've got more expeditions. Yeah. The show just never changes. But at least we're like on location this time.
Yeah.
Clearly the budget's gone up a bit.
You can always tell when they've gone to an indoor set.
Yeah.
Because the lighting on the people doesn't match the lighting on the background.
Yeah. That is pretty obvious. That's a backdrop.
Well, one thing for sure. He's not going to collect 50 pounds from you or anybody else. Quiet.
He's dead, Jim.
Quiet a minute.
What's that?
Sounded like an engine. Something came down over there, behind that rock.
Okay, Viner, slow down. I'll take care of this. Jim?
Okay, I've got it.
His name was Jim.
That they actually have a gym. Good call.
He's wearing a kilt?
I think
He was killed the moment you
I
made
think
your
that's
Oh,
Jamie
and you think
McCrimmon,
we did it?
and he's Scottish.
I can assure you it had nothing to do with the death of this
I think
man.
people have told me that.
Uh-huh.
He appears to have been
Well, don't you know all
electrocuted.
Scots wear kilts?
Trying to open these doors, perhaps?
He seems to know.
With us. Well, there's no danger now. Unless, of course, he's afraid. No, he's not afraid.
Man, he's a lot funnier than Hartnell.
Yeah.
Let's go, John. Come on, Victoria.
Yeah. Because, you need to bring a handbag when you're on another planet.
Victoria.
Well,
For shopping.
well, priorities.
Oh, I shouldn't worry about that. Look at Jamie's.
They could have a nice shop here.
Oh, why? Come along, let's go and see what the others are doing. Come along. You ever seen the like of it, Doctor? Not exactly, Jamie, but very nearly.
Now that we're all here,
You also see the influence of
I think we'd better take stock
the
of the
Beatles.
situation.
Oh, and his
appears
hair.
to be a
Haircuts,
dead
yes.
end. The only way out appears...
Integrating the power series! Yes! Then you differentiate!
Why did the doctor have to tell him anything?
Yeah.
If you don't tell him, he might not. Alright, then.
Did you touch anything?
No.
Well, keep away from that board. Wouldn't touch it if I were you.
I think I'll try this one.
What did I just say?
Nothing.
Oh, man. That was fast, wasn't it?
Well, not a lot of chatty cavemen or
Yeah.
slow-moving Daleks.
Yeah, that was... Well, this is great. I was worried they were all going to be slow, but I guess not.
Any time, Doctor. Now, there is a distinct element of risk in what I'm asking you all to do, so if anyone wishes to leave, they must do so at once. Not you, Jamie. Try to stop this. He'll kill us
Poor
all.
Jamie.
Now, you go back. It's one of those. I'd leave it alone if I were you. Come along.
So that's what the purse is for, to put the deadly weapon in.
I mean, she doesn't have any pockets.
Well,
It is done.
you will see.
Lay him down there.
What has happened to him?
There's been a terrible accident.
You'll notice that
He's been shot.
her
We're
hairdo
all
very
here,
similar
it
to
seems. Will you all sit
Lieutenant
down,
Uhura
Doberman?
from the original Star Trek. Again, this is 66, so that's when Star Trek...
Mr. Klieg?
Yeah, Star Trek first came on the air.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, whatever it is, it's practically wrecked our chances of getting off this crummy planet.
Makes you wonder if he's actually an American actor or a British actor trying an American accent.
I'd probably go for the latter, because his voice is off.
Any of you say?
Now, in case it gets cold at night, I brought these anoraks and some food.
Why doesn't
I'll let
he
you know
offer
when I'm
to
ready
take them
take
all
off.
in the TARDIS? The TARDIS is big
You
enough.
have to stay. We
Yes,
might as
but
well finish
probably
our job
doesn't want them
before
to
we explore
understand
down
how he
there.
got there.
That
I
is,
guess.
if the professor know what to do.
The hatch.
Another kind of interesting thing here is the
stays with me.
long takes. It's not, cutting back and forth. You see, 2, 3, 4 minutes at a time where the camera doesn't move.
Yeah.
So it must remain like a gigantic honeycomb, like bees.
I get the feeling it's not going to remain in there.
From their winter sleep.
I'm pretty sure this whole thing is just the mummy, but in space.
Better get busy. Everything must be recorded. It's too cold to remain for long.
It's what you might call foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Things up. It's obviously an opening device of some kind, Doctor.
I don't know how you can be so blasted calm about it all.
I'll see if it works then. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sure it'll work. It's just not going to open the hatch.
As the professor says, this is a unique archaeological event. It would be such a pity to miss it.
It's not supposed to come back to life, though.
I can tell you from experience, having played the Beast in Beauty and the Beast and had to have gloves like that to give me the claw, that's very difficult to work with.
Yeah.
Because you're so used to independent fingers that when they're put together like that, it's very difficult to work with them.
Yeah.
You? If I have any further trouble from you, I shall have to take drastic steps. Do not think we can allow a little girl like you to interfere with our plans.
It's a fast little thing.
What is it? I think it's their leader, their controller, Jamie.
Man, they had to find a lot of tall actors for this.
You belong to us.
Yeah.
You shall be like us.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're not gonna kill them, but they will assimilate them, basically.
Yeah, this whole idea of cyborg, a cybernetic organism, again, just like we've been talking about, has its origins in the 60s because we were making such incredible progress with prosthetics, people who were losing arms and things like that. And again, I may have been wrong on the date, but the Jarvik heart was one of the first implantable mechanical hearts. And again, I thought it was late 60s, early 70s. It may have been later than that. But there was a transplant, an actual transplant, either of a human heart or an animal heart into a human being in South Africa about this time. And the guy lived for a little over 2 weeks. But again, this is all just in its infancy.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how we can replace organic material with mechanical systems to help keep people alive.
Yeah.
And, just like later on with the Terminator and all these other, AI things, there were always those people who said, at what point do you stop being a living organism and you are then controlled by the mechanical parts? So.
Yeah, that's true. It is interesting that two of the Doctor's greatest villains, the Daleks and the Cybermen, they're both just mechanical.
Yeah.
Like, of the big three that I have been informed on, two of them are very mechanical, and then the other one is the Master. So.
Pressure cooker with a wedding cake on his head.
Belong to us. You shall be like us.
It's also interesting because he's got the bigger thing on his head, but he doesn't have the
How did you know that we would come
connectors.
to release you?
Wires hanging off of him.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Let go of me! I will stand still! Please, breaking my arm!
The trial is futile.
You sure
Wow.
that's the one? Yeah.
Well, they did it first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, what are those bombs loaded with? Smoke. Great, give us a couple, will you?
Yeah, sure.
Come on.
Yeah, because that's just what you need on an alien planet
Okay,
as
here we
smoke
go.
bombs.
Yeah.
I'm coming too.
Later, maybe. Not this trip.
Prepare the tombs.
They really mean it.
Cryogenics were also just coming in the mid-60s.
Yeah.
And there was that rumor that Walt Disney had been frozen when he died because he was dying of cancer, and everybody was absolutely sure that cancer would be cured within 20 or 30 years, so freeze the organism, thaw them out, and cure them of cancer.
Yeah. Makes me wonder if there was anyone else that people believed was frozen. Like, why did we stop at Walt Disney? If that was the if that was the
very
idea.
famous baseball player actually had his head frozen during this time period. And of course, Space Seed in Star Trek, those guys were all suspended animation.
Right.
Do we suspect he's going to become a Cyberman?
Probably. He's kind of got the height for it.
Yeah.
And anything horror related, Black Guy goes first. So.
I wonder if this was in color, if he had on a red shirt.
They got a lot bigger.
If they refuse, we shall destroy the opening device and seal them up in their tomb forever. Now do you understand?
Yes. Yes, you're right.
Makes you
I'm
wonder,
invulnerable to this.
that accent.
I shall be
Are
master.
they supposed to be German? Well, a name like Klieg, he's obviously German, but he doesn't look German.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a German accent.
The supreme.
I would think that the Cybermen are impervious to their own weapons. I mean, that was the testing room after all.
Makes you wonder if those are controlled by magnets underneath, or they were, radio controlled.
Yeah.
I can still see him standing there before those horrible Dalek creatures came to the house.
Oh yeah, technically the last serial was a Dalek
I
serial
shall never
again.
forget him.
How did they not hear that?
Yeah.
Move, Callum, don't move.
Quite the slap. Or maybe not.
Get back to the controls, all of you. Steady.
Oh, don't do that!
Back against the controls, everybody.
Homicidal Roombas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, let's see what you can do against this.
Watch out, Doctor!
I wonder what happened. What if he died? There's something in my sock. And I don't know what it is or how it got there, but there is, and I hate it.
It's a Cybermen.
Oh, plastic. How did plastic get in my sock? Oh, that was bugging me for half the episode.
You will re-enter cells to conserve energy.
Kind of hard to tell who's actually speaking.
I think their mouths kind of open.
Yeah.
Like there's a part that in the mask that drops back.
Keep back! Smoking! I told you we shouldn't have touched it.
Where did they get the rope to tie that up?
I hope you made those ropes secure. Oh, the king of the beasts himself couldn't get out of that one. Good. Ah.
Wrong again, Jamie.
Jeez.
It's aluminum foil.
Jamie. Victoria.
Interesting that door was a little short for him.
That the sun will not harm me.
Well, you tried. Wow. Not enough.
Shoot him in the head.
Well, now I know you're mad. I just wanted to make sure.
Well, the fuel system's okay. We can blast off any time.
It's been 3 days, apparently.
All right.
I thought he just ripped the thing out. I didn't think he'd start oozing. Yeah, I just did that.
Cybernetic goo.
Yeah.
Last time, they were frozen for 5 centuries.
Reversing the film.
Yeah. I mean, they paid a lot of money for that effect. I mean, for the 60s, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Leave the other guy down there?
Guess. Both of his masters were evil, and he's kind of part Cyberman now.
Yeah. Oh, there he is.
Oh, never mind.
Well, it really is the end of the Cybermen, isn't it?
Yes, Jamie? On the other hand, I never like to make predictions. Come along.
I'm sure they'll never come back.
What? No takeoff?
I guess not. Wow. They ended an episode without some weird crash, explosion, takeoff thing. Alrighty. What do you think of that?
Well, it certainly had way more action.
Oh yeah, I feel like this was much better than the other two we've seen.
Yeah.
A lot faster paced.
Oddly enough, though, even at only 4 episodes, I felt some of the writing could have been tightened up a little bit.
Yeah, a little. You may have been able to tighten it up maybe to 3 episodes or something, but I mean, because this is 4 episodes long, it's about the length of basically a 2-parter on normal Doctor Who,
yeah.
Which we have had Cyberman 2-parters, so I don't know. Yeah, it could have been a little tighter, but I thought it was all right.
Yeah.
It was definitely better than 7 parts, that's for sure. I do like Troughton. I kind of prefer him a little bit more to Hartnell. But maybe that's because we haven't had enough of Hartnell yet. Because, I mean, it's very obvious, like, this is... When we started watching classic Doctor Who, this is kind of what I thought we were going to get. A decent pace, you know, obviously it's much older than the Doctor Who I'm used to. But a story that is pretty much centered on the Doctor and not Ian, basically.
Yeah.
So, I did like that. Now, to that effect, Jamie and Victoria as companions were interesting. I don't want to say... I hesitate to call them, like, useless, because they did have some of their uses, but they were definitely different from Ian and Barbara.
Yes.
What do you think of them?
Yeah, well, again, Jamie, good-looking young man.
Yeah.
You know, obviously got some muscles. But, again, what does he add to the entire... Not just the 4 episodes, but to the whole thing? I would have to see more of that.
Yeah.
Because unlike Ian and Barbara, who actually had a purpose, you know, with their educational background,
that's true.
That would help out. So they both of them, what's his name again? Jamie and Victoria, just seemed to be along for the ride. They needed somebody. And again, not seeing their purpose yet, but again, over the course of however many years that Troughton did this, they probably developed a little bit more.
And that's kind of like, sort of like the modern companions, like Rose. When they brought in Rose, you can really think about it like, she doesn't add a whole lot. She's just this 19-year-old girl. There's not a lot that she brings in, but she's just along for the ride. And she slowly starts to figure out how things work and how to work in these situations. Then you move over to series 3 when we get Martha. Kind of the same thing, but she's actually like about to become an actual doctor, so that can be more useful. Whereas you're right, Ian and Barbara did have very specific uses. That one of them was a math teacher and one of them was a history teacher. I don't remember which one was which, but they did have their very defined uses. And I will say, maybe Ian seemed a bit more useful as, for lack of a better word, the man of the group, because he was definitely, well, he was taller than everyone else. Jamie was not. Jamie seemed shorter and a little thinner than Troughton in this, so I'm not sure how much muscle he can provide. And Jamie almost seemed a little bit more bumbling than that. But maybe that was just the lighter tone of this, and because this was clearly written to be a lot more comedic than the 2 Hartnell episodes we watched. Especially with all of, pretty much, even though, yes, the Doctor is a little serious in this because it's the Cybermen, that's a big deal. He knows how big of a threat they are, because this is not the Cybermen's first appearance. But he is still a little playful. There was that one part, I don't know if I included it in the reaction, but it was just before they trapped the Cyberman leader in that thing. And, the 3 of them were just kind of crouched down, and Jamie said something, and the Doctor just taps him on the head. He's like, shut up, Jamie. We're trying to we have to stay quiet here. So I did like that, and I did like him. So I think it would be interesting to see a lot more of Troughton. Like after watching An Unearthly Child and the Daleks, I'm interested to see more of the Hartnell episodes, but I know they're going to be slow, and I know that he's not the focus, technically, of the show. Whereas we come over to Troughton, this is very much the Doctor Who I'm used to. We're focused on him, and he's kind of a goof.
Yeah.
So, I wrote down 450 because this is pretty much the only other time that I've ever heard him give a somewhat definitive age. Because in the latest episode of Doctor Who that I watched, which was Voyage of the Damned, he said he was 903 years old. Now, apparently, some people have told me that kind of contradicts some stuff. Like, apparently the 7th Doctor says he's over 1,000. And so how does that work if the 10th Doctor is younger than the 7th Doctor? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, I guess there's kind of a theory about that, and you've probably heard this before, even in your science classes in school. The idea that a spaceship traveling at a certain speed away from the Earth can return, and whereas the people on the spaceship may have only averaged or aged about 10 years, the people on Earth would have aged 100 years.
Yeah.
So at various times, the Doctor, as he goes through the time and space in the TARDIS, he jumps back and forth within his own lifetime. So that, here he can be 450, then he can be 1,000, then he can only be 900, because you're basically catching him at various phases from the time continuum.
I suppose, and I hate that theory because that goes against everything I know about anything. When the whole, yes, we've been gone, we left, and everything's fine, but coming back, that ages everything up and the place we're going. That makes no sense to me. I've always hated that theory.
I will say this, though. Again, this is the teacher in me speaking. Also about this same time, mid-60s, very famous science fiction writer Kurt Vonnegut Jr., one of my favorites, wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, which is the story of a young man who literally becomes unstuck in time. And just every now and then in his life, he'll close his eyes and it's 1967, and he opens his eyes and he's back in 1945 during the Second World War, and he closes his eyes again and he's been transported to the planet Tralfamador, which is 30 years in his future. And so just at various moments in the book, he goes from place to place in his life, but in his own mind, nothing ever changes. He is conscious of all of the elements of his life in that time period, but he wakes up as a young man or as a middle-aged man or as an old man. And again, that's something that in the 60s, a lot of people, not just Vonnegut, but time travel was a very big thing. Star Trek did it. There was an ABC show called The Time Tunnel that ran for a couple of years. Various ideas where these two guys, jump into the time tunnel and they go back and try to correct things that went wrong, like the sinking of the Titanic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So again, that's a very common theme in the mid '60s like this. So, I think everybody was just accepting of the fact that you're not going to be able to explain everything. And yes, that is frustrating, but that was just, that's the way it is. Oof. So it goes, as Vonnegut would say.
Yeah. Alrighty. The next thing I wrote down are the financiers, the two main villains of this episode. It makes sense that they would think that they could try to control the Cybermen or negotiate the Cybermen. Obviously, I've seen episodes of the Cybermen before. I'm sure you have too. And we understand there's no negotiating with them. It's like trying to negotiate with the Borg. Although Janeway does that in Voyager, but that's Janeway. It's different. So I'm trying to... What exactly were they hoping to get out of the Cybermen? It was something about we need their power and something like that. There was something I'm trying to remember what it is actually that they needed the Cybermen for.
Well, again, you've got this power structure where it is very rare throughout human history where you're going to find somebody who has both the physical strength and the intellectual strength.
Right.
So in this case, they're assuming that because of their superior intellect, like Khan, but see, Khan was one of the few who did have both the intellect and the superior physical strength.
Right.
But they're trying to figure out a way where they will still be in control and use the Cybermen basically as their muscle, as their enforcers.
Yeah.
But, you can't control that. I mean, that would be the whole point, is that at some point the Cybermen are going to resent being put into that kind of position, and they're going to rise up against them.
Well, and it was also arrogant to think that their weapons could harm the Cybermen, which I guess they did. I was wrong about that. The weapons were able to hurt the Cybermen, but I would think about that a little bit more if that's specifically in a testing room where they're testing what weapons work on the Cybermen and what don't. So it's interesting that they would think that a Cyberman's own weapon would be used against them. So that's interesting. And the other thing is they said they were some sort of cult of magicians. Did you catch that?
I heard that, yes.
They didn't explain that either, so okay. I was...
Again, now this goes all the way back to ancient times. And again, don't know if you would have studied this when you were studying like ancient Greece and ancient Persia. The word magician did not always have the same connotation that it does today. It goes back to the word magi, remember the three kings, who were both magistrates, that is, judges and astrologers and people who could predict the future, supposedly, as well as people who could supposedly perform what we would call feats of magic, which is just basically science that they understood and nobody else did.
That is true.
I'm assuming that's what the magician thing was, kind of like we would think today about like the Illuminati or somebody like that.
True.
A group of very highly intelligent people, who are trying to I don't know if they want to control the world as much as they want to reform the world so that we can do away with things like poverty and war and things like that.
And then so all of that would then tie into why they needed the Cybermen, because they thought the Cybermen would be the most helpful in that.
Yeah. It never occurs to them to just lay their plan out to the world and say, hey, listen, we can do away with poverty, we can do away with hunger, we can do away with war, and all we need is cooperation, because, as we know, people are not perfect. And some people, and again, hate to use the literary reference here, but if you go all the way back to Paradise Lost, where it's literally, the story of Lucifer being kicked out of heaven, because what he ultimately says is, I would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. The idea that there is only one plan and everybody must do what is required. And he looks at that and says, but I don't agree with that, and therefore I'll risk being cast out so that I don't have to put up with something that I disagree with.
Yeah.
Too many
I guess
literary
that's
references. Sorry.
It's probably fine. They're going to have a field day with that in the comments. Alrighty, let's see. Going back to a bit of more of just how the show was made, the designs of the Cybermen are interesting. I can definitely see like how these designs evolve into what I'm used to now, where they look very like, well, they obviously still look like they were made in the 60s, but like now the Cybermen in New Doctor Who, they look like what the 60s wanted to have the whole time. And this was an interesting effort of trying to make them look incredibly robotic, but I'm wondering, like, because it's obvious they have like some sort of suit on that's not metal, and then they have the metal parts and the metal head on top of it. But I'm wondering if it was the intention that it is all completely metal, or is that something like specifically in the design where it is a suit that you're putting over the skin of the person, and then there's the mechanical stuff attached onto it.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, just it seems to me that would be the original concept, as they are not completely mechanical yet. There is still the organic part of that. So, yeah, I would think this is a suit that has been grafted onto the human skeleton, the human body, whatever. Although, again, when he smashed that guy at the end and all the stuff came bubbling out, that's obviously organic material, because it wasn't shooting out like oil out of an engine that's thrown a rod or something. I would think that it's not meant to be completely mechanical. They did not move in the mechanical way. They move more fluidly like an organic being would. So it's just a thought, I guess.
Yeah, and I will say I think I've seen some like even earlier designs of the Cybermen, and they look like the way they look in this one even seems a lot better than that. Like, and maybe I just saw a picture and it didn't process in my head completely, but it almost looked like this, but instead of like the metal, it almost looked like they had a cloth or something over the face. But maybe I could be wrong about that. So So overall, it was an interesting design. They were all tall, like really tall.
Yeah.
And since it was just people in this suit with the mechanics on top of it, I'm wondering how many tall people did they find for this?
Well, you have to understand that that's very common. I mean, look at in Star Wars, Peter Mayhew was 7 feet tall to play Chewbacca.
Right.
So yeah, that is very common. If you want to do some form of alien life, you don't want to make them all look too human, so you go with either the very tall or the very short, which of course they did in the Return of the Jedi, where they had the small Ewoks and the very large Wookiees and sort of thing like that. So yeah, that's very common.
Yeah.
Even earlier, back in the late 50s, excellent film called Forbidden Planet, where they have Robbie the robot, and it's obviously 2 or 3 feet taller than everybody else, but there's obviously a human being inside that moving it around. So
yeah,
it's a very common theme.
And it could also be that the rest of the cast is a bit shorter than the average person. I mean, we're 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
But Patrick Troughton might not be as tall as we are, and Jamie seemed to be about his height and Victoria a little shorter. It could honestly be the Daredevil effect, where it's like, how do we make Wilson Fisk look bigger? Let's cast a bunch of shorter people to make Vincent D'Onofrio look like a giant.
And there's another trick that they used to do in television and in films. If you have a short leading man, like when they're on set, they actually have the actor playing the hero, who's supposed to be the larger life character. They would actually put him on a small platform and have everybody else stand on the floor. It may only be 3 or 4 inches, but the idea is simply to make him look as tall and as beefy as the rest of everybody else. But then when you meet him in real life and you're going, hello, you're much smaller than you are on the screen.
Yeah.
So,
alrighty, and then Let's see. I wrote down the Cybermen just as to comment on the Cybermen themselves. They do seem very much like nothing has changed over the years with the Cybermen. It's still sort of the same, robotic voice, and it's still the exact same intentions. Like, with the Daleks, we see the origin of the Daleks in the last one we watched, and they weren't quite as, bloodthirsty as they are now. They weren't so hell-bent on killing all of them, even though they did want to, exterminate the Thals. They weren't quite to that level of hatred that they are now in modern Doctor Who. Whereas here, the Cybermen seem to be exactly the same. They were just trying to do what they wanted to do. They wanted to take over, take control of you, make you a Cyberman, and we'll make more Cybermen, basically. So,
well, that may be a function of, if I understand correctly, the Cybermen, as they go along, they get less and less of the organic material and more into the mechanical, whereas the Daleks were.
Yeah.
And there is that certain frustration amongst organic beings throughout science fiction that the more you lose, the more it builds that hatred inside you, where you literally become illogical in your quest for a victory of some kind. So, I mean, that's a possible alternative explanation.
Well, and that would make sense because we've had episodes in modern Doctor Who with the Daleks where there's like this group of 4 Daleks called the Cult of Skaro, and their task was to imagine so that they could find a different way that's different from what normal Daleks do so that they can, still become the superior race and take over the universe, basically. And where was I going with this? Right. Okay. I think.
But the idea, that here's what we have always done and it has never worked, so we need to
do something else. And the leader, Dalek Sek, he tries to do something else, and he actually kind of combines himself with a human to become this more humanoid, completely non-mechanical Dalek. And the other 3 Daleks are like, this isn't right. This is not Dalek anymore. This is not what we should do. And he says, like, what we have done has brought us to extinction. We're the only 4 left. So we were tasked with imagining this is what I have done. But that doesn't work. The other 3 end up betraying him and killing him.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then pretty much the last thing is you wanted to talk about special effects for the intro.
All right. Again, having lived through the 60s, back then they did not have a lot of stuff for these rock shows. A lot of times they were playing stadiums and things like that. But out in San Francisco, there was this place called the Fillmore Auditorium, and it was inside, and they were doing all these rock shows, and they wanted something that would enliven the show. So what they did was they put up this gigantic screen in the background, and they literally had what today you might remember as an overhead projector. Remember in your
oh, yeah.
So what they would do, now this is really stupid. They would put a glass pie plate on top of the projector, so that it's projecting this huge circular image up onto the screen.
Okay.
Then they would put in like water, and then colored oil. They would take like olive oil and other kinds of oil, and they'd put food coloring in it, and they drop that in there. And you know that oil and water don't mix.
Right.
So they would clump up, kind of like, you remember when you had your little lava lamp many, many years ago? All right. Now, then one of the stagehands would take a second glass pie plate and put it down over this mixture. And so while the rock band's out there playing, this guy's back there just moving the pie plate up and down. And every time it causes pressure, these little globs would expand and come back down, and and it would do all that sort of stuff like you see in the opening there, which I'm sure they did electronically. It was simply some way of manipulating electric current to make it do that. And of course, Stanley Kubrick did that famously at the end of 2001: Space Odyssey, which again would be right about this time, 68, 69, if I recall correctly. So yeah, it's just a matter. It's these guys were incredibly inventive. And a lot of the stuff that today we take for granted, you have to understand back then, some guys going, how do I make this, like psychedelic? And, oh, wait, lava lamp stuff. And since you couldn't put a lava lamp up on the screen,
Right.
they just figured out how to do that with whatever materials would react with each other like that. So we saw a lot of stuff like that back in the 60s.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, that does sound amazing if you are stoned out of your mind at a rock concert and you're watching that.
But you also remember, because you and Jordan and I did this one time, that stuff, and I can't remember what it is. It's some kind of like silly putty, but when you compress it, it gets hard, but the moment you let it go, it liquefies. When I don't know exactly what, and they did this on the Big Bang Theory. Remember, they put some of this stuff on top of a speaker, and then they started blasting some bass notes through it, and it would break apart, and then it would come back together, and it would jump and do that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's all sorts of useless science that people then took and said, hey, wait a minute, I can make something really cool out of that, and make special effects out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that's incredibly trippy. Well, that's pretty much all I wrote. Really enjoyed this episode. I would be interested to see more of the Troughton era. But we're not doing that. We're not doing that probably until I hit Series 7. So next time on Doctor Who, we are actually going to be moving on to the Third Doctor. We might actually be in color next time.
Ooh,
wouldn't that be interesting? We're going to be moving on to Terror of the Autons. So yeah, any final words?
I'm good.
All right, sounds good. So, with all that being said, I'm Alex, again with Dad, from 7th Hour Films. See you guys next time. Alright guys, thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch more of our Doctor Who classic reactions, you can click on the playlist. You can subscribe if you haven't done that already.
Please subscribe.
You can support me on Patreon, and you can follow me on social media. Links below in the description. See you guys later.